they still call the security services the KGB, which is really funny in that part of the world because all the other countries around it want nothing to do with sort of that type of Soviet terminology. The president still controls all print, radio, and TV. This particular group under the KGB keeps information security in line. It owns the DNS, therefore website access. They've got one Bell Telecom, and for the same reason as in Zimbabwe, there's essentially two reasons there. One's visibility, and one's they don't want anybody connecting outside this because it's very lucrative. And in particular, I read something on VoIP in Belarus. They're terrified of that because one of their main sources of revenue is charging the citizens for telephone calls, and especially really high rates for calls outside the country. So VoIP is strictly prohibited. Let's see, both in 2001, 3, 4, 5, and 6, there has been interesting cyber run-ins with the government websites. When they would post information critical of the president, they wound up going offline. In 2006, a group of people, tried to organize via flash mob. By the time they got together in the city center, the police were already there and arrested all of them. The big event was a cyber showdown last year on Election Day. Now, both the government and the opposition tried to use the internet to their advantage, but the opposition, their constituency was largely youth and was urban, so they were able to connect with their people so much more quickly. The government actually tried to invest in infrastructure because its constituency is elderly and rural, so it was trying actually to get the elderly more wired and to put infrastructure out into the country before this election. But on Election Day, at least 37 opposition to media websites were down, and the presidential challenger site didn't even work. A week later, when there was demonstrations to protest, the riot police came out. There was a fight. They arrested a bunch of people. On that day, too, the internet was inaccessible from the Capitol. So in this country, according to the NGOs, it's not necessarily comprehensive and all the time, but it's highly selective. And at certain critical points in time, you will see the government shut off access. The president won the election by a wide margin. Here's specifically a defacement of a Belarusian government site that specifically addresses the liberty of expression. The top 5 are much harder cases, I would say, much different than the bottom 5 for this presentation. In Burma, it is illegal, for instance, to have incorrect ideas. That's the type of laws you're dealing with there. The net penetration is minuscule in the country. You have Myanmar internet, and you can have a state email account and no other. You can't discuss politics. You can't connect to webmail. No anonymity, no pornography. Cyber cafes, the ones that exist, when you show up, you have to give your name and address, your identity card, a number, and then you're told that they're going to take frequent screenshots of your activity and pass those on to law enforcement. You can go to prison in this country for having unregistered computers, shared accounts, and saying things against the government. Very little room for resistance in this country. There's a lot of activism abroad, including some random, international organization and multinational companies that have done a little bit. But again, that's going to provide almost zero pressure against a nation state as far as retaining power. There's a real interesting case in which the company that sold the monitoring software to Burma did not want to be associated with this sale at all and denied it until an NGO found a picture on the web, actually, of the company sales director and the prime minister shaking hands and closing the deal. This will start a series of a couple of Turkish defacements that are pretty cool. But if you ever go on Zone H and want to see some cool political defacements, my own experience has been the Turkish hackers are really good, and tend to be really fun to look at their work. Cuba is extremely tight. Highly educated, good medical system and all that. But less than 2% of the people are online. The basic philosophy in Cuba is that the government should own everything. and that people should not own their own computers. They do have some Correos de Cuba, or internet cafes. And, but again, in a country, especially that's politically repressed, you're not liable to go anyway. But if you did have any money to spend on it, if about the average wage in the country, you're going to spend about half of it for an hour. The internet should not violate moral principles, and things like illegal connections or posting counter-revolutionary information can land you in jail for a long, long time. One of the NGOs that visited Cuba, this worker, she sat down on her computer, she got a connection to the internet, and she typed a test email with a bunch of Cuban dissident names in the body of the email and tried to send it. She got a pop-up on her screen that said, "This program will close down for state security reasons." And then, according to her, her computer crashed. There is a healthy cyber black market in Cuba, and it revolves around these connection codes to the internet. If you're a student or you work in a company that is allowed to access the internet, you actually get a code that you can connect with. These are bought and sold, and hardware is also sold because you're not supposed to have it, but prices are extremely expensive. So there is actually a video evidently posted on the web of officials announcing punishment to students for having illegally sold their connection codes, and thus they were expelled from school. Let's see. In a lot of these countries, you'll find that either through multinational corporations or consulates, if you've ever been overseas, you know that consulates, they try to provide services to people, especially people like you. So if you're, I remember I went to Warsaw a few years ago, and the French consulate, one of the things it was advertising is internet access. Now, you don't need it in Poland, this type of thing anymore. But again, it was available for people perhaps who, to save them money. So they had a French library and then a whole row of computers just with connections to the internet to come in and do research. That kind of thing, in particular in Cuba, and in one of the countries we're going to look at in a second, people had come in to visit friends or workmates, but they try to set up the laws in these countries so that you can't connect to the internet through them. And of course, police, if they suspect this sort of thing, is very dangerous, both for the borrower and the borrowee of the internet connection. Here's a Turkish defacement of a Cuban site. It actually says "No war, forever world peace" and something, but that's pretty cool. So number 3 is China. China largely got number 3 because it is the most sophisticated net surveillance. It's not as bad as some of these other countries, and completely sort of keeping a lid on the country, but very sophisticated. These are adjectives that I've seen to describe the Chinese internet. An army of public and private personnel, and one of the things, especially about China, is that looking at their laws, you see massive support for government this, government that, government can do this, government do that. But as far as individual privacy and the little guy and support for the small people, it's really not there. Evidently, that's evidently we're at that stage, and with the internet being the primary mechanism that people are using now to gain information, hopefully that will change. Everybody's heard about the Great Firewall. So if you're in the PRC and you're trying to do searches for things, what you'll generally find a lot of information removed on are things like Taiwan, Tibet, Falun Gong, Dalai Lama, and Tiananmen Square, not surprisingly. Now, just from testing while there, it looks like keywords at the National Gateway are probably blocking the results of searches from arriving back to your computer. Now, it's very sophisticated in this country. So not only are they blocking certain things, but they will be missing web pages within websites, even when statistically they seem to have the same content. So what that tells you is somebody has probably made the decision to block a certain site for whatever reason, while maintaining the overall website intact, and even if it has similar content. And then the other thing that's very interesting is there's been at least a claim that blog entries have been not the cause of blocking or censorship, but actually modification on the part of the government. At the beginning of this year, it was announced by Hu Jintao that there would be a renewed purification of the internet, and that China was falling behind. New technologies, RSS and things were causing them to fall behind the curve. It was affecting the development of socialist culture. And one of the results of that would be one of the tactical moves would be no new cyber cafes in China this year. Cool web defacement of a Chinese government site by a Chinese hacker group. Turkmenistan. So the guy on the top right is named Turkmenbashi. And this was a true personality cult, really anachronistic, I think, for up to the year 2006, to December of last year. This guy literally had all of the media within his country, newspaper and television and radio, pretty much all day long, sang hymns, recited his poems. And this guy, he said, he wrote a book called the Rumana, and he said if you read it every day, you were guaranteed access to heaven. So the personality cult came to an end last year, but basically his legacy, almost no internet access, none from home, no cyber cafes. There's a few approved websites. And then some of the statistics that are out there show Turkmenistan basically at the dead last almost in the world, with the exception of number one, which we'll get to in a second, in terms of IT certifications and net users. So this guy, he died at the end of last year, and they had an election. And the guy, his election, he won the election, Berdi Muhammadov. And this guy, one of his election promises was unrestricted internet access for the people. And only 2 days after he got into power, he came into power on Valentine's Day, or whatever they call February 14th in Turkmenistan. And only 2 days after he came into power, they had an official grand opening ceremony for 2 internet cafes. And they were at big Soviet Central Telegraph buildings. They announced no censorship, and this Western reporter actually visited, during the grand opening, and he sat down. And he said, sure enough, there was no registration required, no photographs, no ID. He said the speed was great. The price may be a little expensive for Turkmenistan, but nobody showed up. So this was the first internet cafes in the history of Turkmenistan, and nobody showed up to take advantage of them. But he did say on the bright side, as he toured the country, he said he saw computers. No internet connections, no modems, that kind of thing, but these guys appear to be big gamers. And so he said perhaps it's just a matter of if things change, which is not clear at all that things are changing there yet. It's just maybe a matter of giving them some internet connections and some cables. So here is a final web defacement for Turkmenistan. So does anybody want to guess what number one is on the list? North Korea. We're already down to number one. Does anybody recognize the little guy on the top left? That's baby Kim Jong-il. And does anybody see North Korea in the satellite map at night? It lies between South Korea and China. And that really one bright spot there is the capital, Pyongyang. Right? So North Korea comes in at number one, not surprisingly. It is the world's most isolated country. And so, if you're in the world's most isolated country, where, for instance, the biography of Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il's father, basically says that, when he went out and he played his first round of golf ever, and he hit something like 16 holes in one, right? In a country with stuff like that going on, you can imagine the threat of the internet would just be far too much to imagine. So there's only state media. And one of the things about the state media, it does remind you a little bit about 1984, because all houses, all domiciles in North Korea are wired with a radio in which they receive daily feeds from the government. Computers absolutely unavailable. Still, it's said that Kim Jong-il is fascinated with the IT revolution. He gave a visit